Kate Wynne stood like cattle in the market square of Ash Ridge, her father's hand shoving her forward as the spring wind carried dust and judgment through the crowd. Her blue dress, faded at the seams, hung loose on her frame, and her hands clenched at her sides, white-knuckled against the shame burning through her. "She can cook, sew, and keep quiet," her father announced, his voice carrying across the square. "Anyone with coin can take her home tonight." The crowd didn't laugh, not loudly, at least, but the murmurs between the silences cut deeper than any blade. Women looked away. Children peeked from behind skirts. Kate kept her eyes on the horizon, where the New Mexico territory stretched endless and indifferent. "She's barren," her father added, the word falling like a stone. "Tried for years. Nothing happened. But she's got steady hands and teeth in her head. That counts for something." Kate didn't plead. She'd done that before, once when her husband threw her out after 2 childless years. Once when her wedding dress was torn from her by hands that used to hold hers gently. It hadn't mattered then. It wouldn't matter now. Near the back of the crowd, her mother stood with a worn shawl pulled tight, eyes fixed on the ground. She didn't speak, didn't stop it. Just drifted away with the parting crowd, as though she hadn't come to watch her daughter be sold. A man stepped forward from the edge of the square, broad-shouldered, his shirt stiff with dust, a wide-brimmed hat casting shadow over most of his face. His coat smelled of horse and pine. He didn't ask her name, didn't look her over like a buyer inspecting merchandise. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and dropped coins on the table. No bartering, no questions. Her father raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "She don't come with a refund." The man didn't flinch, didn't look at Kate. "She won't be judged anymore," he said, and then turned and walked away. Kate didn't move until her father gave her one last push. "Go on, you're his now." She bent to pick up her satchel. Just a pair of old shoes and a locket with her mother's face inside, and followed the stranger into the dust. The wagon waited near the blacksmith's, hitched to a pair of mules as quiet as their owner. Kate climbed up, settling beside him without a word. "Long ride," he said, handing her a dented canteen. The water tasted like tin and old wind. They rolled out past the edge of town, where the prairie opened like a page waiting to be written on. The sky went on forever. "Why'd you take me?" she finally asked, not expecting an answer. He didn't look over. "5 kids, no mother, no time." Her throat caught. "So I'm a governess?" "No." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "Just someone not cruel, that's enough." By dusk, they reached a ranch tucked into the dry ribs of the land. The house leaned slightly westward, like it was listening for something that never came. A barn stood behind it, weathered gray. Chickens darted through the yard, squawking as the wagon pulled in. The man, Bo Thatcher, she'd learned during their sparse conversation, stepped down, tied off the reins, and walked to the porch without checking if she'd follow. She did. The porch boards creaked under her weight. The front door wasn't a door at all, just a thick quilt nailed to the frame to keep out the wind. Inside, 5 faces looked up. 4 boys and 1 girl, all wide-eyed and red-cheeked, each holding still in the half-light. "This is Kate," Bo said. "She'll be staying." The youngest, maybe 5 years old, walked straight to Bo and wrapped both arms around his leg. Bo bent down, scooped him up with one arm, and opened a door with the other. "Room's upstairs," he said to Kate. "Water's in the bucket, still warm." She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing the wall. The bedroom was small and plain, A wash basin, a narrow bed, a window looking out toward an open field lined with fence posts. She set her satchel down and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sounds of strangers moving below. Morning brought the smell of smoke, old coffee, and something burning in the pan. Kate moved carefully through the unfamiliar kitchen, trying to find her place. The children stayed quiet around her. Judah, the eldest, watched her with folded arms. Levi whispered to Gideon. Mira, the only girl, sat near the fire, clutching a scrap of fabric she refused to let go. Samson, the youngest, hovered nearby, mimicking her every move. She tried to cook, but the beans turned to paste. The bread wouldn't rise. She spilled coffee and burned her hand on the tin pot. Later, she jabbed her finger twice, trying to mend a ripped sock. The needle rolled beneath the stove. That afternoon, while lifting a pot of stew, her grip slipped. The cast iron crashed to the floor, stew splattering across the boards. The sound startled the hens outside. Inside, the children froze. Kate stood still, heart pounding, waiting for the shout, waiting for the snap she had heard before. The front door opened. Bo stepped in, looked at the mess, then at her. Without a word, he crouched, picked up the pot, dumped what was left back in, and wiped the floor with a towel. "It's just stew," he said, and walked back outside. Kate stayed frozen, the rag still in her hand, heat rising in her throat, except this time it wasn't shame, but something quieter she didn't yet have a name for. 2 weeks passed. Kate learned which child spilled sugar, who liked their eggs hard or runny, whose nightmares came on windy nights. She swept the floor until her shoulders ached and scrubbed pots until her hands cracked, determined to earn her keep. One night, after the dishes were done and the children had disappeared into their rooms, she sat on the porch with her hands in her lap. Stars burned clean above the roofline. She tried not to cry. She failed. Later, she crept from room to room, checking on them as though it might anchor her to this place. Mira had kicked off her blanket. Kate tucked it back around the small shoulders. The child stirred and whimpered. Her forehead felt warm, too warm. Kate's heart quickened. Bo was already in the hall when she stepped out. "She's burning," Kate whispered. "I need willow bark. Mint if you have it." He didn't ask questions. Within minutes, she had everything. She boiled water, crushed herbs, drenched cloth. She pressed cool linen to Mira's face, cradled the girl's small frame, and hummed songs her mother had started but never finished, lullabies cut short by a husband's temper. She didn't stop, not when the child shivered, not when her own body sagged with exhaustion. She stayed up all night. By dawn, Mira opened her eyes and whispered hoarsely, "Pancakes." Bo stood in the doorway. He didn't speak, but the tension in his shoulders eased. His eyes stayed fixed on Kate like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. Something strong. Something holy. Kate didn't smile. She was too tired. But she didn't flinch from his gaze either. She simply nodded and turned back to the girl who was already dozing again in her arms. The next morning, when Kate came downstairs, steam curled from a kettle already warming on the stove. Next to it sat a tin mug and a piece of paper folded once. 2 words scratched in stiff, uneven handwriting. "Thank you." No name, no signature, but it didn't need one. Later that day, she was rinsing pots behind the cabin when Samson came wandering up, arms raised. "Maple?" he said. bright and sure. She turned, startled. He wrapped his arms around her legs and grinned like he'd just named the moon. She didn't correct him. She bent down and pulled him close, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled, not because someone expected her to, but because she wanted to. As spring settled into the bones of the land, the rhythm of the cabin began to change. Kate's hands found their steadiness. Bread began to rise. Beans stayed whole. She stitched feed sacks into scarves, one for each child. She taught letters by candlelight, helped Gideon trace his name on a piece of kindling, braided Mira's hair into 2 clean ropes. The first time one of them said it, it came out like breathing. Levi passed her a spoon and muttered, "Here, Mama." The room went still for a beat. He didn't correct himself, neither did she. "Need salt and nails," Bo said one afternoon, hitching the wagon. He paused at the step. "Come if you want." Kate climbed up without asking why. The road to Dust Bend rolled quiet and open, dust kicking up behind the mules in town. Bo went inside the general store while Kate waited on the porch, arms folded, eyes scanning the street. Well, if it ain't the Barren ghost come back to town." The voice cracked sharp across the square. Kate turned to see her former mother-in-law standing near the dry goods stall, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. Beside her, clinging tight, stood the younger wife, lace gloves, red cheeks, and a hand resting too deliberately on a belly that hadn't yet rounded. "That's her?" the girl asked, loud enough for half the market to hear. "Oh, that's her," the older woman drawled. "Pretty, but cursed. Couldn't give us even a squealing pup." "I will," the girl said proudly. "A big, healthy boy. He'll carry the family name, not like her, useless as a cracked jar." Kate didn't respond. She stood still, jaw set, hands curling at her sides. She turned to leave. Then a shadow fell beside hers. Bo had stepped out of the store, a sack of salt in one arm. His eyes blinked slow as he looked at the 2 women. Then he turned to Kate. "She's the one who gets Mira to sleep when her legs ache," he said quietly. "The one who taught Samson not to throw rocks. The one who makes that house feel like it has a roof again." Neither woman spoke. They didn't need to. Bo nodded toward the wagon. "You ready?" Kate nodded back. They walked away together, leaving the words behind them like dust. That night, Kate didn't speak of what happened. She tucked in the children, pulled quilts over bare shoulders, ran her hand over Gideon's hair as he slept. Later, she stepped onto the porch alone, shawl wrapped around her. Bo followed. He stood next to her, watching the stars scatter across the sky. "You didn't have to say anything," she said. He kept his eyes ahead. "I didn't say it for them." She turned toward him, the moonlight catching on her face. "I used to think love meant being chosen at first sight," she said quietly, "but I've learned something better, being chosen again after someone's seen who you really are." Bo didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, took his hand in hers. "If you're not sending me away," she said gently, "then I'm not going." Summer came down like judgment, no rain for 7 weeks. The sky stayed pale and cruel, the color of bone. The creek behind the barn shrank to a muddy thread, barely enough for the mules. The land cracked open. Wind grew sharp. Corn curled brown on the stalk. Beans withered. The chickens stopped laying. Bo spoke less each day. He worked longer, came home with dirt in his eyes and nothing in his hands. The children stopped asking for more at supper. Kate listened to their stomachs growl through the walls at night. Still, she rose before dawn. She filled every basin and bucket with water from the deep well. She wrapped her hands in cloth and walked out to the dying garden. The earth was dry as ash, hard as stone, but she broke it anyway, turned it over, made space where there had been none. Some of the ranch hands offered to help. She refused. This was hers. Each morning she watered. Each evening she checked the leaves. When they sagged, she sang old lullabies, the ones her mother never finished teaching her. The cabin grew quiet again, until the morning Bo didn't come back from the field. She found him collapsed near the fence, breathing hard, skin flushed with heat. "Just tired," he muttered, waving her off, but she felt the fever burning through him. That night he lay in bed, breath ragged. Kate wiped his brow with cool cloths and spooned water between his lips. He muttered in dreams, twitched beneath the covers. Sometime near midnight, he turned toward her in his sleep and whispered, "Don't leave me, not you too." Kate leaned close, her voice low and steady. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not when I'm needed." By morning, the fever had broken. When Bo opened his eyes, she was still there, hair loose, face pale, hands cracked and raw from the hoe. "You look like hell," he rasped. She smiled. "You should see yourself." A few days later, the back door burst open. "Ma, come quick," Samson shouted. She followed him to the garden, heart bracing for bad news. But there, tucked beneath a curling vine, a single red tomato clung to the stalk, split on one side, imperfect, alive. Bo stepped up beside her. They stood in silence. "How?" he asked. Kate bent to touch the vine. Her hands trembled. "You taught me," she said. "Not everything worth keeping comes easy." Bo looked at her hands, blistered, brown with dirt, stitched at the wrist with his red kerchief. Without a word, he reached for them. He bent and kissed her hand, slow and deliberate, like she was something he owed an answer to. Kate didn't pull away. She looked up at him, dust and sweat on her cheeks and something soft in her chest unfurling like spring. He raised his eyes to hers and then, without permission or apology, he kissed her, not as a claim, not as a rescue, but as a man who had waited too long to say what he felt. She kissed him back. There was no music, no audience, just the creak of the wind and the rustle of a garden that should have died and didn't. That night, they sliced the tomato into 6 thin pieces, one for each child and one to share between them. They ate slow, like it was something sacred. "I don't have much left," Bo said later, when the children had fallen asleep. "The land's tired, my bones too." Kate turned to him. "You still have more than most," she said. "Because before you, I had a name no one wanted to speak. Now I have a garden that remembers my hands, children who call me home, and a man who lets me stay without asking me to be anything else." Bo touched her cheek with one thumb, rough as fence post bark. "You never needed rain," he whispered, "to grow something beautiful." They came in spring, not with dust on their boots like the rest, but with polished wagons, clean hats, and hands that hadn't held a shovel in years. 2 men, government contractors. They brought papers, promises, and plans. "There'll be a rail line," one said, spreading a map across the kitchen table. "Cuts clean through this ridge. Elevation's perfect. The company's prepared to offer good money for the land." Kate stood near the stove, arms crossed. Bo didn't move from the doorway. "We're not looking to pressure you. the other added. "But think of what this could mean for your children. A new house, a better school, real security." Beau's eyes didn't leave the window. Outside, the swing hung crooked from the oak. Beyond that, the garden rustled in a soft wind. The soil still bore the marks of Kate's hands. The carved bench sat beneath the pine where they had shared coffee and silence through hard seasons. He looked at none of it and saw all of it. "No," he said simply. The men blinked. "Sir, with all respect." Beau turned slowly, arms folded across his chest. "I'm not selling. There's room to negotiate. You can turn your train," Beau said, "or go through someone else's hill." The younger man opened his mouth again, but the older one placed a hand on his arm. They packed up their map and left without another word. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, Beau and Kate stood at the edge of the road with a plank of wood between them and a hammer in hand. The children watched from the porch. Beau held the sign upright. Kate drove the nails. When it was finished, it stood just beyond the fence line where travelers could see it as they passed. Burned into the grain with careful hands were the words, "Not for sale." Time moved like weather, slow and certain. The children grew tall. Their hands grew calloused, their voices deeper. One by one, they left to chase lives of their own. Some returned with babies. Others sent letters and gifts wrapped in paper smelling faintly of train soot and unfamiliar towns. But the house never emptied. It filled in new ways, with laughter, with footsteps too small for boots, with the smell of bread rising in the oven again. Kate's garden stretched wider each year. It bent with the wind and spilled over the path. Corn grew beside sunflowers. Mint tangled with onions. Everything flourished in places it wasn't supposed to. Every morning, Beau stood on the porch, mug in hand, hat pushed back, watching her move between the rows like she belonged there. He never interrupted. He just watched, like witnessing a miracle didn't need words. One autumn afternoon, Beau walked the path with one of his grandsons, a boy no older than Samson had been when Kate first arrived. The boy tugged his sleeve. "Grandpa, why don't we just call it Kate's garden?" Beau stopped beneath the arch at the garden gate. Above them, carved deep into the wood with a steady hand, were the words, "She did not bear my blood, but she gave birth to the rest of my life." The boy looked up, blinking. "You mean she gave you a new start?" Beau smiled, slow and quiet. "She gave me everything. When Kate Wynne passed, they buried her beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the garden, the same tree where the wind chimes had once hung, the same tree Beau had tied the swing to for Mira back when her legs were too weak to walk far, the same tree that had grown with them through drought and wind and long-forgotten winters. Beau carved her headstone himself. The stone bore only one line, "Here grew everything she was never given and all that she gave anyway." After that, Beau rose with the sun each morning and sat beside the grave, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a carved bird he hadn't finished, sometimes with nothing but silence. He never said much, but he didn't have to. Until one day, he didn't come. They buried him beside her beneath the whispering branches. The wind chimes long rusted. The swing rope faded to gray. And the garden? It kept growing even when frost came early, even when the earth cracked again, even when the rains forgot their way. It grew back, not in neat rows but in wild spirals of life, mustard greens in the fence line, beans coiling up the porch rail, sunflowers taller than memory, long after the railroad curved around the hill, long after the men with maps forgot why they came. Travelers still passed the fence at the edge of the land where Bo and Kate made their home and slowed their wagons just enough to read the sign nailed there, the same one Bo and Kate had put up together. It read, "Not for sale," because sometimes a place remembers those who refuse to leave, and sometimes dry hills bloom for the ones who chose love when no one else did.